good concept because it's a cheap structure. The standardization is good, but there's no soul in this mother. There's no soul in it. Okay. Sam is the Illegitimate Scholar Podcast, the weekly cultural anthropology and history podcast that makes sense of our senseless world through indigenous and historical examples, academic methods in social science, and a perspective not limited by the crushing restrictions that come with traditional academia and public schools, government schools. So today we're going to talk about architecture and how it relates to culture. I've been on in Aesthetics Matter, and I'm tired of pretending that they don't kick recently. So I'm going to start, this is just going to be for the Patreon because I think it's a little dense, but I'm going to start with a discussion on Nonplace. We're going to talk about globalism and its effects on the world around us in a number of ways, specifically as it relates to architecture. I went overboard on the amount of content I did as normal. My episodes wouldn't be late if I was a little bit more concise. That's on me. Homogenization of culture, which is related to globalism and what we can do and what has been done. And I'm going to use McDonald's as an example because I think it illustrates some really good points, but that's at the end. I got a bunch of books and Audible links below, a lot of books that I've talked about before. If you're in the market for those, please check that out. I got a few spots left in the Patreon for $2 a month. It's experimental, episodes a little bit longer, and I'm going to be doing other premium content. Really, right now, you can kind of get me to do pretty much whatever you wanted for $2 because I'll try pretty much anything at this point. No innuendo. The stuff we're going to talk about today is going to have some of these traits of non-place. And to me, when I think of a non-place, and the most non-place of non-places would be just the most drab concrete airport or like a hospital with no specific characteristics. And hospitals are more commonly like this because they are a little bit more standardized. But I think that it has a lot of there's a lot of examples of this, of things that have these characteristics. And I think these characteristics are inherently anti-cultural, and they're not culturally informed in the sense that they're standardized in a bureaucratic way. And I mean, that's informed by the culture, but they're not built for like it. I think they are places that harms the soul. Okay, I really do. I think that they are places that harm the soul. And I don't like them. And I mean, they're necessary in a certain way. I think a lot of airports do a good job of adding in specific characteristics that make it better. But like, they are places that I think should be necessary, but minimized, both in the sense of how much time we spend in them, but also minimized in the sense of, on the spectrum of non-placeness, how non-place they are. So something that's more non-place, like more non-informed. So whenever we can have elements that are culturally informed, we should, and elements that can't, for whatever reason, safety, hospitals have to be sterile, so you're not going to have shag carpet in there, but you can do certain things that within the confines of safety, you can still do other things. But I'm rambling. I'm glad I have this outlet now for the Patreon. But yeah, so I'm gonna get back into. I might repeat myself a little bit as I go into this, into the next one. So globalism. Globalism, I think, is strongly connected to anti-cultural forces, and I say that because with globalism, you have an over-standardization of everything, and with over-standardization, you have things that are similar regardless of where they're going. So like the construction in most of North America, there's some exceptions to this, but in most of Canada and the US, we build with wood and plaster. It's like pressed dust. And I think a lot of Europeans think that's crazy, but that's how we do it in North America. But that way that we're building, it's like, you see what you end up seeing in certain places. Some places have it more than others, but you end up seeing like the same exact house in Ohio as you do in California. And like, based on the natural environment, we'll get into this more later in the episode, like that doesn't make sense. And also like certain places, they have a color to them. They have like a vibe to them. They have contours to them. And traditional ways of architecture, they would complement these things and they would be using things from the natural area. And so everything would just blend better, in an esoteric or metaphysical way. And if you're listening to the show, I hope that you kind of get what I'm saying. I don't know if I don't always get too far into the specifics of this, but That's what I give off, right? Tell me if I'm wrong. I don't know. Okay. But regardless, if some of you guys are here right now, like, dude, I thought this guy was like socially conservative out here, like crapping on the liberals, and now he's talking about some hippy dippy. But I digress. Okay. Globalism, homogenization. So it's a negative. It's good in certain places, not good in others. It means that everything you have is going to be great. Okay, the whole world's a Toyota Corolla. Toyota Corolla is a great car. Okay, but it's not exciting. And if you don't really care about cars, then whatever, get your Toyota Corolla. But in some other aspect of your life, you're not going to have a Toyota Corolla. You're going to have something that's a freaking Ferrari. And it might not be cars. For me, it's not cars like that. But like other aspects of my life, I got something really cool because that's what I value. But then if 9 out of 10 things in your life are so standardized, they're all Toyota Corollas, you might as well just frickin' drive yourself to the lobotomy office. So this is especially true of non-places, but I have an article that will help you understand what non-place is, and that's relevant. That's in the Discord. Please hop in the Discord to get that if you'd like to read it. But non-places, these places like airports, hospitals, places that don't have a lot of cultural characteristics, they kind of need to be homogenized out of necessity to a certain extent. But again, we should try to minimize this, and we should promote things that are cultural and that they are their own things. I mean, that's why so many Americans, especially affluent ones, because they can afford it, love going overseas to see other cultures. But like, come on, if it's the same in Dayton, Ohio as it is in Illinois, I digress. Okay. So there are some positivities of homogenization, right? So you get comfort and familiarity. You can get regulation that can make, food safety. For long travel, you go far from home. Like McDonald's is hopefully going to be like pretty similar in Paris as it is in Florida, as it is in Indiana. And in practice, that's not always true, but that's the idea, right? Like that's what you're supposed to have. It's better in Europe because they have better ingredients. Eat fast food in Europe once if you're going over there. All right. I don't, eat the great food that's there. But yeah, get the fast food once, go in there, be the American, do it confidently. Yeah, so like comfort and familiarity. I mean, there's a benefit to that. It's just maybe, you gotta balance the exploration with the comfort that you have. Okay. Yeah, Five Guys. For New Year's Eve, I ate at Five Guys in Dubai, and it was awesome. It reminded me of home. It was fantastic. I really, really enjoyed it. I was there with a few of my friends. And Christmas was Johnny Rockets in Bahrain, and that was great too. I remember that burger being when I was out there with the boys eating an American burger. There was in an American restaurant with things that were recognizable to me, and very nice and friendly Filipino waitstaff who were Muslim, but they were Merry Christmas to us, and very, very great people in the Middle East, especially all the immigrants that come to work. So with globalization, this happens with language as well. And we're going to be talking about languages soon because languages are so, so important. They're really probably the most important single characteristic that you can have to retain your culture. And how you speak is in your culture. So if you're not subscribed, please subscribe because we're going to be covering that. So when languages are standardized, it has a big effect of standardizing culture because so much of the way that people interact with their culture is through their language. And, sometimes you'll hear that something is not translatable. And that's because that specific language, it has a concept that doesn't make sense in the context of the other language. And you'll hear this, it's not translatable from languages that are more different from each other. You don't hear that a lot for English to German because they're very related. They have a lot of the same roots. You hear it more for to indigenous languages or to languages that are not Indo-European. So, there's something to this, and especially to ancient languages, because the ancient languages and the indigenous languages of today are a lot more reflective of a different way of life, which would reflect a lot of different characteristics in that language. And again, we're going to get into all that in another episode. But today, 40% of the languages that exist are endangered in the sense that they, like endangered animals, they have a low population of speakers or a population, and it's possible that they will go extinct if the language doesn't get saved in some way. And to be honest, most of them are probably just going to go away because there's so many of them, and some of these languages, they don't make sense anymore because they're being spoken in some remote place where the young people left, and they their community dies with the language effectively. It's very sad. Many such cases. So this will be linked in the Discord if you want to look at it. But this source claims that 90% of languages may go extinct in the next 100 years. And of course, that's a crazy estimate. It's an estimate. 100 years in the future, who knows? But I think that that's a pretty good estimate, because there's a centralization there's a globalist centralization of the way that people do things. Debt diplomacy in Africa is a big thing that we should probably talk about, and in Latin America and all these other places. And it has the effect of, like, I can't get into the specifics, but it destroys native industries a lot of times. The effect of the global markets being inserted into new markets that had indigenous economic systems before, and it can really destroy those and then incorporate those people into globalism, and then they have to learn English, learn a different language, maybe Mandarin, but maybe French. But like, there's a lot of people in Africa and Latin America and even in North America, indigenous people as well as other minority populations, that are still in their communities, like the Amish, speaking languages. But many of those communities are dying in the face of globalist influence. And, I'm somebody who really values culture. And if you're listening to this podcast, you do as well. So, it's not a win. It's an L. We're taking an L on this one. Unfortunately, we're taking L after L after L, man. I mean, we really are. Yeah, like the U.S. women's national team going up against that U15 team. So the last thing about languages is, let's talk about the past, right? So even in the 1800s, there were a lot of minority populations that were way more popular in Europe. So like France had a bunch of minority populations. A lot of people spoke Breton, which is from Brittany, which was a kingdom of Celts. And, the people are still Celtic there. The culture is Celtic, but the language has been reduced a lot in the last 150 years. Ireland 150 years ago was mostly speaking Irish, and now it's not, besides in the Western Edge a little bit, and it's seen a tiny revival, and so is Wales. And this happened all over Europe in the face of nationalism, is that these nationalist forces that were at the time, they were trying to go up to a higher level of centralization, up to nationalism. But that has now turned into globalism, higher than that even. But the standardization of language, when you look at nationalism, you can then compare that to the standardization that's done with globalism. So within Italy, all of these different languages existed, and they were united into a standardized Italian. And these dialects that had existed for millennia, maybe, were, basically turned into Italian. And you can still find people in Italy that speak certain dialects, but it was actively discouraged in these Prussian schools, these nationalist schools that were adopted in the United States and Canada and most of Europe in varying degrees. And that sucks, man. Like, these languages had survived for so long, and then it's just, people think it maybe happened a long time ago, but 200 years ago, we'll say 250 years ago to be safe, the concept of being a French person wasn't really a thing, or being an English person. It wasn't really a thing. Maybe in England a little bit more, but it was a lot more class-based, a lot more community-based, a lot more local-based. It wasn't all this. It was assumed that there were minority populations that were different in what we would call countries today. It was just a different thing. I know some of you know that to varying degrees. We'll have to cover that thing. Let me know what you want to hear more about in the Discord, please, because if you tell me what you want to hear about, I will do it. Especially if you pay me $2 a month on the Patreon. So now we're finally into architecture, in the architecture episode. So what this globalist thing, what it does is that the buildings look the same everywhere, because it's it's cheaper that way. And if you can use the same materials everywhere, you can make those materials easy to ship. You can ship them on standardized trucks, on standardized roads. You can ship them to different places. They are all purpose in the sense that they can be put up in wet areas as well as dry areas, as well as like humid areas. And well, that's the same thing, isn't it? Or in like places with hurricanes, like they make them standard purpose, and then they make versions of these things that are like better at a particular thing, but that can be still shipped in the same way. Like, you know, you can get a few different types of sheetrock, but it's all 4x8 or 4x10. And you can get different versions of 2x4s. You can get different ranges of 2x4s, some treated, but they're all 1.5 by 3.5 and cut to 10, 12, 8, 16, like standardized lengths. And that's a standardization of globalism. So I book a lot of hotels when I travel, and I book a lot of Hilton hotels, a lot of the same Hampton Inn and Garden Inn. Those are Hilton's like cheaper hotels. And it's the same building. It's the same building in Texas as it is in Pennsylvania. It's the same design. They have like pre-made designs. And that's cheaper, and it's more efficient, and it's familiar, and it's comfortable, and I know where things are sometimes because it's the same exact layout. And that's great when I'm on the road. I like that. But it's not the only thing that matters. Just that's my point. That's all I'm saying. It's just not the only thing that matters. So I don't know about where you guys live. So maybe like maybe tell me in the Discord what your experience with this is. But for me, like I live in a colonial house. It was built in the 60s though. And a lot of the houses in New England are colonials, which is the traditional style of houses. And there's a few other traditional styles that people still have. But a lot of the new construction is standardized, you know, right now, trendy, a lot of farmhouse styles, which just farmhouse style houses, they don't make sense in New England. I mean, look, yeah, they make sense. They look fine. They're nice houses, but like that's not the culture that was here. It was colonial style houses. And even farmhouses were colonial style houses, or a couple other styles that are common but are not, they're farmhouses, but they're not this farmhouse. And I don't know if that's other people's experience in other parts of North America and across the world, but new construction tends to be like that. And so that's the momentum, right? And I hope that that's true generally. I think it is. But if that's the momentum, then if that's the way you're going, then the end point is that that's going to become the new standard as the old houses get torn down and run down and people move out and things like that. And, you know, then everything either looks like Detroit or you can't tell the difference between Dayton, Ohio, Las Vegas, and Toronto. The standardization makes it easy, and it makes it economically efficient, which means that in theory, more people can have access to that stuff. But in practice, the same system that has made the building materials cheaper and easier to put up and more efficient, the houses have just gotten more expensive. And that's because of a number of different reasons. And you can say it's not because of capitalism, but I think it is because of our manifestation of capitalism, in the sense that it comes from rent-seeking behavior, where we have privilege, we have incentives in our society that has allowed people to put in regulations and increase costs and monopolize certain industries to the point where they are making the most profit, and they've made things much more expensive as the people at the top, the ruling class, gets more and more rich, as COVID was the largest wealth transfer in history from the lower and middle to the upper classes ever in absolute terms. And I think close to it in percentage wise. So in the past, the architecture, and this was tied in with the culture, it's inseparable from the culture. It would be tied to the local area and its way of life. It would complement it. And the specifics of that are, well, we'll talk about some of them. Materials, the materials that you use are going to be from that area. So the architecture of an area is going to be tied to its local way of life, how people interact with the landscape, what the landscape is, what natural elements are around you. It's also going to have to do with the materials that are around you. The colors and the building materials that you have are going to reflect what you can build. So I'm going to go back to examples in a second, and I'm going to have an article on my Substack about this. So please look out for my Substack and get on there. I'm doing a lot of stuff. So the way of life that works with your culture is going to have, it's going to be, there's going to be examples of that in the architecture, and that's something as, obvious as like houses on Borneo and Kalimantan, houses that are up on stilts, and then they're like in a place where there's tsunamis, water goes under the houses instead of destroying the houses. So they have the stilts, they'll just let the water go through it. You're not putting in North American style houses in that place. You just can't. And that's the local architecture, and it's created this gorgeous style of house that's so unique, and that's amazing, and that's part of a response to this situation. So the Haudenosaunee, Iroquois is another name for them. That's the name that the French gave them, but Haudenosaunee is what they call themselves. They have long houses. They're made of elm bark. Okay, that's what's available to them in their area around the Great Lakes and what's today United States and Canada. So these long houses would hold 20 families. So there would be a bunch of families living in these long houses. It would be communal, and the political structure and the complexity of the Haudenosaunee is reflected in these being semi-permanent, permanent structures that are very long with multiple families living in them. And you can compare that to the Algonquin Native Americans, which were in multiple places, but Eastern Algonquin in New England. And most of them lived in what are called wigwams or wetus. So they're smaller and they're more crude than the longhouses, the Haudenosaunee. And they're not meant to be as permanent. I think most of them would make a new one every year. They made of wood and bark and rope, and they would hold like one family. And yeah, built one a year, and they're small. I think I'm going to try to build one soon. We'll see. Got a bunch of stuff I want to do. For the Celtic people in Ireland, round houses made with peat and stuff on them. I didn't look too much into it, but they look cool. So there's some pictures on the Substack. And thatch, it's everything around you. It's just what's available to you, and then what your political structure allows you to do. Obviously, you're not going to be the Haudenosaunee in the 1400s pre-contact making colonial houses out of like 2x4s and freaking plaster walls, because you don't have the processes to even make that stuff. So that's an extreme example, but there's plenty of other more basic examples that example illustrates. I want to talk about a structure that I hate. I kind of like it because it could be used for good, but it is not being used for good. It is the structure for something that could be something that would be great for people, but in practice, it's not. It's called a 5/1. It's got 5 floors residential, 1 floor commercial. They are mostly rectangular. They are extraordinarily efficient because of the way that they're built. And links in the Discord, as always, the specifics of this. They are made to standardize building codes that have been adopted throughout not only North America, but throughout the world. And there are now standardized zoning, which is standardizing the way that people build houses everywhere across the world, because again, it's cheaper. And this has the effect, these places are going to be built to a standardized structure. And then with materials that are common throughout the world because of the standardization of the processes across the world of creating different building materials, now these 5/1s are everywhere from Malaysia to Nairobi to Buenos Aires to freaking Toronto to Compton. And now there's these 5/1s. And look, the 5/1, it's a good concept because it's a cheap structure. The standardization is good, but there's no soul in this mother. There's no soul in it. And that's bad. And then it's not even cheap. Because, I mean, if you live in Canada, the US, or Australia, or Ireland, anywhere in the Anglosphere, no one can afford houses. The US is the most affordable place, and nobody can buy a home. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. So this 5/1 is the symbol of the enemy, because it's just the standardized building that's being put everywhere, that's a mix of shops and living situations that are just cookie cutter boxes where you're in this place looking around, and besides what you've put in there yourself, you wouldn't even be able to tell what continent you were on, because you got the freaking central AC and everything in that building, of course, no matter where you are. So even with the temperature, you can't freaking tell. And that's not good for the soul, brother. That is freaking non-place. That is non-place. That is non-human. You gotta you gotta cut down this type of stuff in your life, and this type of 5/1, that ain't right. And that ain't right. And they could make a few changes to it, right? They could make it a little bit better and make it a little bit more culturally informed, but that would cut into the profits. And look, I know you got to make money. I think capitalism's great. I think I should say the free market is great. I think iterations of capitalism are great. Not a commie, not any of that, but you gotta care about other. You gotta have a culture that values other things in addition to this. So with McDonald's, man, so like our culture has the capability to do this. There's lots of places in the world and in North America where there are examples of local culture. Oftentimes they're in rich places. Near where I'm from, Mystic, I think not Levittown, but Leavenworth in Washington is like based on a Bavarian village. And there's a lot of more affluent communities that have building regulations that are more specialized, where they're like, hey, like our building's got to be like this. And if you tell a corporation like McDonald's, which likes to standardize its buildings, that they have to do this to put their shop there, then they do it. And that results in these gorgeous McDonald's that I've seen that are all McDonald's blended in with the natural environment and with the architecture around it. And it's great. And look, if every problem of the modern world and of the technology we have was solved in that way in every situation, I think we'd all be doing fantastic. And I think that that's the type of stuff we got to bring in. And look, if you're listening to this and you're like, dude, you're talking about McDonald's. What the hell are you talking about? Like, just trust me. Go to the Substack. The pictures are going to be up there. Okay. They're going to be up there. It's good. I think maybe I'm crazy. You guys let me know. Yeah. But I think I hope I'm getting my point across, because those McDonald's, man, I mean, you can have the standardization and the comfort of that and then have it still be like a beautiful location that doesn't take away from a natural environment and turn the entire world into Coruscant, which, if you don't know, is a world in Star Wars that is a dystopia where the entire world is covered in just one massive megacity. That's not what we want. Come on, man. Like, I love diversity. Like, I love different cultures. I love different types of people. Don't make everybody the same. It's cool. We can be different and still like each other. I like you guys. Okay. Getting a little hippy dippy today. Yeah, look, Discord and Patreon if you want to. If not, look, I love you guys anyway. It's all good. Thank you. And I will back on for the live show soon.